Chairman, Dr. Arvind Vermani, to chair the session. Today is the webinar on Nehru, Tibet and China by, I think, a very scholarly person, Mr. A.S. Bhasin. He is known to work relentlessly in the IIC library. He has worked on these issues for longer time while he was even at the MEA, and now we have the advantage of this latest book, which has been released about a month back, which is going to be discussing, sharing with us. To and as you know, that EGROW Foundation focuses on policy-oriented research and research-based policy advice. We have been undertaking this webinar series every Friday on all contemporary policy issues. And we thought at EGROW that this is an important issue, and therefore we invited Mr. Bhasin to come and speak to us. Our chairman is chairing the session today. As you all know, that Dr. Arvind Vermani is the former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, as well as the former Executive Director at the IMF Washington from 2009 to 2012. He has published extensively in many refereed journals. He has had a very long stint, very highly research oriented stint in the Planning Commission, as well as he was heading the EGROW. So, with this brief introduction of our chairman, I request him to take over and conduct the session.
Thank you, Charan.
Dr. Vermani, please.
Thank you, Charan. Am I audible?
Sir.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start by giving a brief introduction to Mr. Avtar Singh Bhasin. He is the retired director of the Historical Division of the Ministry of External Affairs. And since his retirement in 1993, he has written a number of books. His main focus has been on India's relations with its neighbors. He has, over the years, published a documentary study of India's relations with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and China in 5 volumes each. His study on Pakistan is spread over in 10 volumes, running into 10,000 pages. I'm sure not many of our listeners here will read such extensive research, so it's good to have him come and talk to us about his latest book, which is Nehru, Tibet and China, which Charan has just shown you. I think you can raise that again, which has been published by Penguin Random House. And with that, let me hand it to you, over to you, Mr. Bhasin, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Vermani and Mr. Charan Singh. I also welcome other distinguished participants in the webinar. It gives me great pleasure to be able to speak to the esteemed members of the EGROW Foundation and other participants and share my views as reflected in my book, Nehru, Tibet and China. I would like to say at the very beginning, my book is a challenge to the conventional story that has been handed down to us since the 50s of the last century. My presentation today is fully backed by highly classified documents of the Ministry of External Affairs, which are accessed in recent years and are already published in a 5-volume book. History is a cruel subject and it does not recognize either friends or foes. As Professor Toynbee said, historical changes are driven by challenge and response, and civilizations are defined not just by the leadership or condition, but how they respond to difficult problems and crises. I have no doubt you will see my presentation in perspective of history. It was not easy for me to write this book. Before deciding to write it, I debated within myself, should I give a counter narrative to this story? And which the people have accepted as true and authentic for the last almost 60 years. The story emerging from my research was so compelling, and I argued that unless the people know the real story, and reason for what had happened, the problem of 60 years could never be resolved. My aim has been to bring to notice of the people the facts as emerging from my research, and it is now for them to take a call. This was the trigger for writing the book. India-China situation has been with us since our independence. The leaders who were in command of the situation immediately after 1947 were all veterans of the freedom movement. Their credibility was very high. People accepted what they said and did. This particular applies to Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister. Jawaharlal Nehru, both as a Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, guided our foreign relations for all the years from independence till his death in 1964. The war that happened in 1962 did not last more than a month, starting on October 20 and ending with China calling a unilateral ceasefire on November 21. But the aftermath of the war is with us for decades, and no resolution of it appears in sight. Whenever there is a border incident, we look for measures to defuse that crisis, leaving the older issue to fester. The book, apart from discussing the border question, also goes into earlier years of interaction between the two countries, when they apparently, and I emphasize apparently, have succeeded in forging a deep and abiding friendship. We looked at China not only as our friend, but our brother, and the Chini Bhai Bhai. A slogan that mesmerized the people of India for quite some time. There was no critical analysis of Chinese behavior. The war, as you know, was a big disaster for India. It the claim that the Prime Minister repeatedly made that India was prepared to face any eventuality and would not overlook any invasion, not only of India, but also Sikkim, Bhutan, means others. The book tells us how the Prime Minister vetoed the suggestion for strengthening the defense structure relied too much on factors which are foreign to India. Whenever a question of China or Pakistan's aggressive attitude was raised, he would say, we have asked our ambassadors across the world to brief the host governments, and when those governments speak to China, they will feel ashamed and change their position. Other countries may sympathize with you, but to expect them to take the bill on your behalf was a policy which was unsustainable. To meet the demands for strengthening of the army, he suggested strengthening of NCC and the territorial army. These were neither in the past nor now a fighting art and not even part of the paramilitary. India had inherited certain facilities and privileges in Tibet from the British as to the borders. The British were a powerful entity in this part of the world until they left. The country in its periphery were no match for their prowess. They had to fall in line with their dictators. But after the end of colonial rule, the tables were turned. Unlike the British, India was no longer in a position to enforce its writ. China was taken as a weak country before the Communist Revolution. Once the Communist Party took over, it had emerged as a strong willed country with a powerful army, the People's Liberation of China. People Liberation Army. Once the Communist Party took over, it had emerged as a strong-willed country with a powerful army. It did not feel shy to use it either. For quite some time, India continued to believe A new China was like the Kuomintang China, and it was possible to deal with it in the way they were dealing with Kuomintang. This was a problem of perception, and Nehru failed to read it well. Soon he admitted the Kuomintang government was better since it did not raise the problem that the communists were raising. The problem that persists between our two countries today is that of frontiers. I will concentrate on this aspect in my talk. But before that, I think firstly to understand how we understood the ground situation and failed to read the signals emanating from the region. Communist China was replacing Kuomintang regime in the Civil War, established the People's Republic of China on 1st October 1949. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was keen to recognize the new regime at the earliest so as to be the first among the non-communist countries to do so. There was pressure from the United States to delay its recognition. Warning of American pressure, India finally recognized the new regime and it did become the first non-communist country to do so. Ironically, even before China had recognized Communist China, even before India had recognized Communist China, it was taken by surprise by the Tibetan government. In October 1947, after a couple of months of Indian independence, the Tibetan government asked India to return their territories that the British in the past had gradually occupied and integrated in India. The demand was vast and extensive. It asked for the return of Sikkim, Bhutan, Darjeeling, Ladakh, and many more areas. Later, Prime Minister had remarked that if India had complied with the Tibetan demand, India's border would have come down to the Ganga. Nehru attracted to the idea of social solidarity, remained passionately committed to it. It was his conviction that to achieve Asian solidarity, cooperation of China, the other big country in Asia, was necessary. He moved it systematically. Even before the Communist Revolution, the Asian Relation Conference, organized by Nehru in March 1947, was the first step in that direction. That it turned out to be a not a very experience is another story. Reading Nehru's independence writing and statements would convince anybody that he had become infatuated with China. In fact, his infatuation goes back to the year 1927, when he first tried Chinese in Brussels while attending the conference on against imperialism. The other statements immediately and before and after independence left no one in any doubt that his approach to China was emotional. He assiduously ruled the new regime. In the process, he made several compromises to achieve his cherished dream, but in vain. Whether China was equal measure, answers for that remained somewhat under question. He himself doggedly pursued his agenda. It is no wonder that in India, a feeling was created among the people generally that China was India's best bet for peace and for achieving Asian solidarity. In Nehru's, therefore, in people's perception, the idea of India-China friendship got ingrained. Unfortunately, China was not much attracted to India or to him. To start with, China suspected India, the Trojan horse representing the imperial interest of the Americans and the British, and called him a lackey. China, who suspected India, tried to preserve its privileges and facilities in Tibet that the British had bequeathed it. India's idea for Tibetan autonomy was taken as part of India's agenda to preserve its position in Tibet. which undermined that of China. This naturally came in conflict with China's decision to liberate and integrate Tibet with itself. China, giving no space to India, bluntly told Delhi, not once but many times, that Tibet is an internal part of China and no interference in its relation or in its matters will be tolerated. The two declared that India's establishment in Tibet was unacceptable. The message, however, did not register in Delhi, and India continued to urge China to respect Tibet's autonomy and be patient in dealing with it. China abhorred India's advice. If we were to put to test Communist China's friendship with or India, we would be disappointed. A look at these decade of 50s, when Nehru had to deal with China, lack of their friendship for him or India stands out in bold relief. To start with, as already pointed out, China abused Nehru as the lackey of the British and Americans, presenting their imperial interests. The Tibetans expelled the Chinese Amban. Amban was the Beijing representative station in Lhasa. In the wake of communist revolution, China held India to be complicit in its expulsion, despite India's denial. China described India's relation with Bhutan as part of the dark vessel system and described it as Bhutan's enslavement, which China said the United Nations should examine. As China invaded Tibet in 1950, request for the Dalai Lama's asylum had been accepted by India. Later, in the face of Chinese warning against it, the pontiff was hinted to stay back. Taking the cue, he chose not to come. His starting remarks on the conduct of India's first general elections in 1952 were ignored in Delhi. Nehru got the wrong end of Chinese stick on India's resolution in the UN General Assembly on the repatriation of prisoners of war in Korea. Chan had described Nehru's resolution as the parent of all evils. China had described Nehru's resolution as the parent of all evils. This was humiliating, but Nehru did not protest and kept Chinese reaction under wrap after ensuring that China did not intend to carry it further. He only told the foreign secretary that when he happened to meet the Chinese ambassador in normal course, not specially, he should tell him to use a little better language for us. After all this, he said he did not want to lose the Chinese friendship. As China nibbled at India's inherited facilities and harassed Indian establishment in Tibet, India entered into fresh agreement to give up all unilateral facilities it had enjoyed in Tibet. India expected this to allow the Indian establishment to be easy. On the contrary, the harassment only increased. Their function became almost impossible. By negotiating the agreement in Tibet, India found to its chagrin and embarrassment that China was more sensitive to Pakistan's interest than India's. Was peeved at the lack of any appreciation from China for India's efforts on its behalf. His lament to Nehru did not draw any reaction and was ignored in Delhi. As China's position after it had occupied Tibet came under challenge by the Tibetans and they revolted, China saw in India a villain in everything that went wrong in Tibet. And described Kalimpong as the epicenter of Tibetan revolt. Even Zhou Enlai himself, during his visit to Delhi on December 31, 1956, spoke to Nehru that Tibetans and others based in Kalimpong were creating problems for China in Tibet. Nehru took it lightly, laughed it off, and said, "Oh, Kalimpong was the nest of spies, and there were more spies there than the residents." It confirmed to China that Kalimpong was indeed the villain of the peace. Thereafter, China continued to complain to Delhi in notes and also in person to the ambassador in Beijing about the encouragement which, in China's perception, Kalimpong was providing to the rebels in Tibet. India denies a little impact on Beijing. The Tibetan government was still occupying China's seat in the United Nations and the permanent seat in the Security Council with the American support. China never made it unsolicited mission to get Communist China replaced Communist China. China did not consider it necessary to feel obliged or even express appreciation for India's efforts. On the contrary, India pointing out to Beijing that its toxic policies in Tibet were hampering India's effort at the United Nations. China was not bothered and continued to follow its agenda of liberating Tibet. Nehru did not get the permanent status. Nehru did not take hints that if he did not convince or Beijing, India could get the permanent seat at the House table, that is the UN Security Council. Since he said China would not appreciate it and he would take it as an unfriendly act, he did not accept this offer. Irony is the same China today opposes a permanent seat for India in the reformed UN Security Council. Similarly, Nehru has taken on himself to get China to organize internationally. While in the process, he incurred the forces of the United States, the Beijing neither acknowledged nor appreciated his efforts. Having successfully showed the lifelong relationship to the people of India, he remained anxious to preserve it. He did not react to any manner that would give the people a contrary impression. Despite all the differences with China and the rebuffs China had administered, whether on Tibet or any other count, Nehru ensured that the unsavory developments were kept away from the people. It was possible to do so in the pre-internet age. As you all know, there was no independent sources of information then. The newspapers and the radio gave only that information that was dished out by the government. Those days, there were no loud and uninformed debates on the media as we see them today. The people believed what the government thought was good for public. As pointed earlier, the leaders at the helm of affairs, particularly Nehru, were veterans of the freedom movement and their credibility of the people was high. They did not question them. Like conversely, Nehru saw in China's rise the insurgence of Asia and from the ashes of colonialism and accepted as a senior member of the Asian community, since he always referred to China as a great country. Nehru's hallucinations about India-China Tibet relations were unfathomable. On the one hand, he was impressed with China's greatness. On the other hand, he was worried about the long-term intentions toward China's intention toward India. He was reconciled to China taking over Tibet, but wanted it to respect its autonomy. He knew China had never recognized him like convention, yet he insisted that India would stand by it and China should also accept it. After these single remarks, let me turn to the border question, which continues to fester even today and cast its shadow regionally and internationally. India's border with China are in three parts: the northeast, northwest, and central sector. The central sector, which runs along the borders of the states of Uttar Pradesh and Himachal, did not cause much as compared to other two parts. Yet, the initial Chinese intrusion began in the central sector, which was essentially probing missions. China found that India's reaction was passive in such cases. The border in the northeast of India was known by the name Mackmore Line. In the west, India's border in Ladakh along the Aksai Chain area was undefined in the Survey of India maps at the time of India's independence in 1957. The maps which the Survey of India reprinted in 1951 until 1954 continued to show the border undefined. As a backgrounder, it would be worthwhile to give the brief idea of the mechanism. Until 1912, the British, as the matter of the frontier policy, had promoted Chinese supremacy in Tibet. In the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, to which China was not a party, both the Russians and the British accepted China's overall control in Tibet, and both agreed to deal with Tibet only through China. However, in 1912, there was reversal in the British policy. It was decided to make Tibet dependent on itself by detaching it from China. The British proposed a tripartite conference of themselves, China and Tibet, to sort out ostensibly the relationship between Tibet and China. Under pressure from the British, the Chinese, though they were not interested in joining the meeting, but against their better judgment, agreed to join it. It was held in Simla. The conference, for most part, discussed the relation between China and Tibet. Frontier was not even discussed at the conference. Henry McMahon, who was the British representative, while presenting the draft of the convention toward the end, introduced Article 9 in the draft along with the maps which had two lines marked on them. Red for India-China border and blue for Tibet-China border. China refused to accept Article 9 and the maps. Naturally, China did not sign the Simla Convention. It continued to maintain that there was no distance from the borders of the conference and China would not accept it and not sign it. Finally, the convention was signed only by Tibet and the British. Further attempt made by the British to get China signed the convention to fail. The red line that marked the Tibet-India border came to be known as the McMahon line in history. McMahon was the Indian Foreign Secretary before he took up the present assignment. Earlier, 1893, as a junior to the then Foreign Secretary Mahatma Duran, McMahon had assisted him in the demarcation of India-Afghanistan border. He found that by giving his name to the line, Duran has immortalized himself. He saw this as his opportunity to go down history. He now gave his name to the line that he had drawn on the map. For over a century now, both Duran and McMahon have become household names and subject matter of many books. Be that as it may, no Chinese government ever accepted this line at the frontier, and on the contrary, called it an illegal and flowing from unequal treaty. Chinese communists disowned it too. Nehru was quite aware of it, yet he went on reiterating that McMahon line was India's border in the north. By virtue of this line, this is important. By virtue of this line, northern part, called Tuang by the Tibetans, and later India gave it the name of Northeast Frontier Agency, came to India. There are quite a few twists in the story. The first was when the Simla Convention having put Tuang in India, it did not occupy it. It continued to stay with the Tibetans and they continued to collect the civil revenues and administer the area, and everybody thought it would be Tibetan India. The second twist came in 1940. The British conveyed to Tibet that while the area was in your possession, we will amend the McMahon line to run south of Tuang, thus putting Tuang, or Nipa as we call it, back into Tibet. As it happened, the formality for the reversion of Tibet had not been completed by 1947 when the British left. Tibet was still occupying Tuang, that is Nipa, while map showed it to be in India. McMahon line was not drawn scientifically. But after surveys and all. We have this on the testimony of Henry McMahon himself. 1935, he gave a lecture on international borders in London under the auspices of the Royal Society for Encouragement of Art. Referring to this body, he said, for lack of local knowledge and for want of time, the line was drawn in a somewhat general term. If the author of the line himself admitted that it was not drawn after surveys, there was a need to conduct surveys and redraw the line scientifically later to make it a scientific bond. Let us not dwell on that for a moment and go ahead. In July 1948, now I'm coming after independence, there was yet another twist. Independent India gave assurance to Tibet that while not annexing any part of Tibet, it would be prepared to an adjustment of the Indo-Tibetan frontier, particularly in the Tawang area. This was in line with the decision that the British had conveyed to North in 1940. Subsequently, in October 1948, the political officer from Gangtok reminded the Ministry of External Affairs only for the implementation of the assurance given to Captain on the adjustment of the frontier in Tawang. But there was yet another twist left. The 1949 developments on the mainland of China appeared ominous. The Civil War was coming to conclusion. The victory of the Communist Party appeared almost certain. China had threatened to liberate Tibet. While India welcomed communist victories, it too appeared worried. It was calculated that should China occupy Tibet, which it was likely, it would become not only the contiguous neighbor of India for the first time in history, but its border would come down to the plains of Assam, creating a sense of disquiet in Delhi and security. On 23rd May 1951, China and Tibet had signed a 17-point agreement which made Tibet formally a part of China. Just before the China-Tibet agreement was signed, India, to forestall this development, in March-April sent a military detachment and occupied Tawang. That is Nepal. Tibet accused India of taking undue advantage of the situation. Their protests were brushed aside. Sumal Sinha, who was the Indian mission in charge in Lhasa, then prophetically warned Delhi that Tawang in future would cause uneasiness on our front. Victors not only refused to reconcile themselves to loss of this territory, which they seem to have absent-mindedly ceded and never surrendered possession of, but also regard present Indian action as both improper and unfair. Number two, asked Sinha, would India be generous enough to the adjustment of the border, which it had promised, and embarrassed Sinha, unable to answer, asked themselves to take up this matter with a political officer. As you will see, one which was supposedly given the name of Northeast Confederacy came in Indian possession only in 1951, 31st time. Notwithstanding the Simla Convention 1950. China in subsequent years reminded India of this indiscretion in a private and circumstance in which it was occupied. Northeast Central Agency was put under the administrative control of the Ministry of External Affairs, later upgraded into full state, calling it Arunachal Pradesh. The result of the above discussion, 2 points that emerged are: one, that despite the British and Indian assurances to formally amend the map to revert Tawang to Tibet, which was occupied by India, and two, national rights not necessarily drawn border. I now turn to the frontier in the western sector, that is Ladakh, border with Sichuan. As I said earlier, when India became independent, the border here was not undefined on the Indian map drawn by the Sunday. It continued to be undefined until 1950. even when the maps were reprinted in a subsequent years. During the talks in January, April 1954 on Tibet Agreement, better known as the Panchil Agreement, it was decided by India that it could not enter into any negotiation or discussions on the frontier question with the Chinese. The brief that was prepared for discussion at Beijing, Oxygen was shown disputed along with some other disputed areas. However, it did not attract any attention. The delegation going to Beijing was directed that it would not enter into any discussion on the borders. The Chinese did not raise any border question during negotiation, as finally the borders were not discussed. So tell me to point out that the corresponding leading to the negotiations was conducted by Prime Minister Nehru himself with the Chinese Premier Xi. In his correspondence, he referred only to issues like trade agencies, travel, pilgrimage, etc., avoiding any mention of frontier question, openly and consciously. Thus, no discussion took place on the frontier question. The Panchil Agreement was signed on 29th April 1954. 2 months later, on 1st July 1954, Prime Minister issued instructions that the old maps of Western India, where the frontiers undefined, be withdrawn and replaced with new maps showing the border with a definite line, and that would be India's border, which would not be open for discussion with anyone. Later it was decided that in redrawing the border, the most advantageous line is shown as the border. Because the new map and changing the character of this border from defined to defined, there was a need to consult the other stakeholder, which in this case was China. But PM issued instruction that borders now drawn immediately would not be open for discussion with anyone. RPS, having drawn the line, no action was taken at physical occupation of the area, not even a checkpost was set up, or even a flag unfurled as a sign of India's sovereignty in the area. Nehru, however, declared that not discussing the frontier.
See, these are people. Then again, these are people.
Can I go on? Nehru, however, declared by not discussing
Yeah, please
the
go ahead.
frontiers.
Please go ahead.
Nehru had declared that by not discussing the frontier while discussing the Panchil agreement, the border between two countries stands settled. He went on betting on this demise hereafter. It was a unanimous understanding of the Prime Minister. The agreement settles specific issues which are on the agenda of the agreement. I am sure you all know that any agreement has two parts, the preamble and the articles that lay down the methodology to settle the issue. The article may lay down. In the present case, the preamble said, being desirous of promoting trade and cultural intercourse between Tibet and the Tibet region of China and India, and for facilitating pilgrimage and travel by the people of China and India. As the text of the agreement would show, it settled only those issues related to trade, travel, and pilgrimage. That by not discussing the frontier question, it stood settled was a unanimous understanding of Prime Minister. But he continued to make this claim with China thereafter repeatedly. Soon thereafter, incursion by China in the central sector area began, which otherwise was quiet. They were spread over a vast area. India read each encroachment as an isolated incident and did not see any pattern in them. Interestingly, whenever India talked to China on the frontiers, China always maintained that they had on the other hand, and they had only repainted them and for lack of time had not revised them. At no time China gave India any assurance that when devising their map, they would follow the Indian map line. In 1958, when China informed India that in devising their map, it was necessary to conduct surveys and discuss them with the other stakeholders, Delhi felt disappointed and asked China to accept the Indian map line and draw their map accordingly. Without such surveys, but China would not accept such a suggestion. So, you're all aware, lines or maps separate the geographical and political jurisdiction of countries that lie on either side of the world. They reflect the vagaries and irregularities of history. They come into being as a result of agreement between stakeholders by adjustment of rival claim, interest, and ambitions at points where they are joined. They are the symbols of sovereignty and imply the limits up to which a government may exercise political and economic jurisdiction. To that extent, given the sensitivity of the issue, it was essential that the borders are gently surveyed and drawn to the satisfaction of both the stakeholders to avoid future disputes. That Indian borders lack these features is in brief an initial story of India-China friendship. The relevant question now is, was Prime Minister himself satisfied with what line he had taken? He was a highly educated man, known for his sagacity, and had wide knowledge of international affairs, as reflected in his book, Discovery of India, which was published before independence. In the Internal Cabinet in 1946, he had headed the Foreign Department and therefore was an experienced and knowledgeable person. On December 8, 1959, Nehru told the Rajya Sabha that he, as well as his ministry, had a lingering doubt about India's stand on the borders and just as worried about the future. Yet he said, this is we should hold our position, and the lapse of time and events would confirm it. And by the time challenge comes, we would be in a much stronger position to face it. But this was the untellable that in future, when it comes, we will be strong and we'll be able to tackle it. One is left wondering if it was the right approach. If there was a doubt, and that lingering doubt, the prudent course was to discuss it with the other party and sort out the issue, then leaving it to an uncertain factor in the future when hopefully India would be strong. There was an opportunity the very next year in April, at the time of Nehru rule and like summit talks. Next year, when Nehru came to Delhi, the two prime ministers held 20 hours of talks spread over 5 days. Unfortunately, the opportunity was not utilized for both sides. On the contrary, Nehru remained as uncompromising as ever and became more rigid than before. On this very issue, it is relevant to draw your attention to the statement made by Foreign Secretary Srimal a couple of months before Nehru above statement. On 28th October 1959, Dutt, speaking at the annual conference of the governors of the Indian states, said, and I quote, the Sikkim-Tibet boundary delimited in 1896 was the only boundary among the entire frontier which was properly delimited. Short of 28, it meant that out of about 3,500 kilometers long India-China border, the only demarcated part was 220 kilometers. It meant the rest of about 3,000 kilometers still needed delimitation or delineation and demarcation. Unfortunately, it was a rigid and somewhat flawed understanding of the borders that proved the nemesis. He would not enter into discussion with China to find that in April 1960, administration by coming back to the Tibet talk. In In April 1960, at the initiative of Jawaharlal, there were summit talks with the two prime ministers. Nehru was sticking to the claim, and both the sector did not even agree to the earlier suggestion, which he repeated, and he said, "Since our borders, but never surveyed and delineated. As border states, there was a need to undertake this exercise and establish scientific borders which would be acceptable to both sides." Then Nehru did not feel the need for it and repeated that even if the borders were not delineated or demarcated, yet they were well by usage and custom or by application of principle of watershed. Who in his conversation with the various leaders like Vice President, Home and Finance Minister gave clear indication that since eastern sector was already under Indian occupation, China would accept it. That is Macmo line. But India too must consider China's claim to the western sector, which was already in its possession since long. Own life insisted that China had even used the exciting route in 1950 and had since been using it to send supply to Tibet and even had constructed the road in this sector. Who offered was that in exchange for China's addition of Indian claim on the eastern sector, line, which had economic value, India should accept its claim in the western sector where India had no presence. Nehru later admitted that the western sector was uninhabited area and there were no trees and not even a blade of grass. They had no economic value. Unfortunately, India's claim in the western sector did not rest on sustainable evidence. Nehru said that when he had gone there for trekking sometime 44 years ago, which would be 1960, because he said this in 1960, it will be 1960. He had not seen any Chinese there, and again he flew over the area in 1954. He did not see any of them either. This was hardly valid evidence to claim Anglican. Was it any wonder that he did not see any Chinese? He himself had said later that area was uninhabited, there is not a blade of grass. Actually, such an area would not attract habitation such as it would be empty of human life. It raises an important question. Did he see any Indian? There was no Indian either. We talked with two prime ministers, despite their talking for about 20 hours, did not produce any. Let us go back to 1957. China had completed the construction of the road to Oxygen and had announced its completion. India was not aware of it. India did not know about it until Chinese announced its construction. Foreign Secretary had given a note about the road to the Chinese ambassador there. For inexplicable reason, instead of a protest note, since it was about the road construction in the Indian claimed area, the note was marked informal, which conveyed that India was not seriously concerned at the road construction. More than that, the note was worded exposed Indian limit. Since it said China not only did not take Indian permission to construct the road, but did not even ask for visa for the workers deployed on the road construction. What was most unfortunate was in the same note, India asked China for help in locating an Indian patrol party which had gone missing in the area India claimed. On 3rd November 1959, China confirmed to Delhi that it had indeed located and arrested a group of armed Indians on Xinjiang Tibet Road in Chinese territory conducting unlawful surveys. Indian reply urged Indian interests further. The reply said that the question whether this particular area was Indian or Chinese territory was a matter of dispute which was to be dealt with separately. It was evident that India was not aware about this. It was not a small road. It was 1,200 kilometer long road, but with 120 kilometers fell in the excise area and implied over 3,000 workers during construction. Oxygen was a square of carriage about 5,180 square kilometers. It was linked to Tibet for China. It was linked to Tibet for China. Later, when the Indian Saudi affair, Arvind Banerjee protested to previous zone line, the China had in the Indian territory, not back to us. To construct the road. If it was Indian territory, where were the Indians when the road was being constructed? Banerjee had no. Apparently, there was not much concern about China having built the road. Since in his letter of 14 December 1968 to you, he made no mention of this road having been constructed in the Jim-claim territory. He only discussed the eastern border that is back north. As it happened, the people of India were not aware of controversies that were being discussed. Whereas Constance has remained an eastern sector for the McMahon line. It was left to you to question the boundary in both the sectors. He pointed out to Nehru in his letter to the 3rd January 1959 that historically no treaty or agreement on the Sino-Indian boundary has ever been concluded between the Chinese central government and the government of India. He also said the boundaries between them had not been delimited and demarcated, and there was a need to do so now. They stuck to the same old line that even if the borders were not delineated, these were well known by usual custom, which he had been maintaining since 1950. You again stress the need for rationally defined borders in terms of latitude and longitude, which had never been done. You also tried to make Nehru's apprehension on the McMahon line, suggesting that China had never crossed it, despite not recognizing it. Since China has recognized McMahon line in the case of Burma, the problem, the McMahon line extended towards Burma also, and it also was Burman border. So China has recognized McMahon line in the case of Burma, and therefore he was saying that if in the case of India also, they will accept the McMahon line, since they have accepted in the case of Burma. Nehru said in Parliament on 8th August 1959, in all these areas, there is no actual demarcation. Insisted our maps were clear. That area was within Indian territory, but it was a fact that a part of the doctrine is broadly covered by the white sheet of their map, Chinese map. No contradiction in the statement. In 1959, the road had peaked and the Dalai Lama had fled Lhasa and taken a position. This provided another reason for the relationship to deteriorate. The Prime Minister met Dalai Lama in Missouri, where he was staying initially. He asked PM for help in getting Tibet in the Tibet with independence. PM told him categorically that India could not go to war with him, and that the whole world cannot bring freedom to China, Tibet, unless whole fabric of Chinese state is destroyed. In his press conference of 5th April 1959, sorry, after Dalai Lama's arrival, at his press conference of 5 April 1959, to Nehru's embarrassment, a journalist pointed out to him the Communist Party of India's mouthpiece, New Age, had accused Indian officials for cloning with the revolt and even named the political officer Sikkim Upper in this connection. And upset Prime Minister replied that he had found in them the crime, we have found in them a certain lack of balance of mind and total absence of feeling of decency and nationality. What they are, I do not know. They cease to be Indian if they talk like that. Later on 29th April 1960, after the failure of summit talks, he faced intense criticism in parliament, particularly on the policy of non-alignment. Noting it too, he chided the members for their brave words, which had little meaning, and said, this kind of thing may well be said at the Ramila ground at Gandhi Maidan in Delhi. With all these discussions and confabulation did not lead to any settlement, the public mind too was agitated. The public, which had been held on the staple of the Chini Bhai, got in suspecting that all was not well in the bilateral domain, but in the two countries. China was then presented as the villain who had deceptively upset the Indian territory and had also killed Indian policeman Tonka Pass. It was a rude shock for the Indian people that the country, which until then they had believed to be their best friend, had now acted treacherously. And public opinion hardened against showing any accommodation. In the face of public outcry, their who suffered loss of faith. Cabinet who suffered the same and was not to let Nehru compromise on the position he had taken until then. Nehru pulled his back to the wall and his options restricted. Any accommodation to China now was like a political hurricane. There was a divide in Congress. As already stated, India, after drawing the unilateral line along the Aksai-Chin-Ladakh border, took no step to announce its presence in the area and allowed the vacuum to develop. Nature hates vacuum and has the tendency to fill it up, and it was a deep. There were senior officers, ICS officers, in the top hierarchy of the Ministry of External Affairs, advising the Prime Minister. They apparently found the personality of the Prime Minister too daunting to advise. The ministry suffered from the Panditji knows best syndrome. Panditji knows best syndrome. Jagat Mehta, who was involved in the problem before, during, and after 1960 talk, and finally rose to be the foreign secretary, described values thus. And I quote, the greatest Democrat dictator in history. And he was the greatest Democrat dictator in history. And his time as Prime Minister was largely wasted. He however conceded that if an officer stood his ground, Nehru was willing to change his own position in pursuit of national interest, but his thought was frightening. It would be lovely to point out what Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad had said something similar to say about in his book India Wins Freedom. Nehru addressed the press conference in 1946 on the cabinet mission plan for the political settlement of India. His answer to the question was such that the Muslim League, which had accepted the cabinet mission plan, reneged from and upset Maulana, who had spearheaded the negotiation with the cabinet mission said. His nature is such that he often acts on impulse. As a rule, he's open to persuasion, but sometimes he makes up his mind without taking all facts into consideration. Once he has made up his mind, he tends to go ahead, regardless of what the consequences be. The border problem was a natural outcome of policy to keep all the differences with China, particularly those relating to the borders question, hidden from the. This resulted in an uninformed public falling prey to what was dished out to them by the official media and allowed wrong perceptions to grow in their mind, which continued to them today. Still going back to 1956, it would be instructive to point out.
Mr. Bhasin, it's 1 hour. Can you just conclude your talk soon?
Okay. Just gave me 2 minutes. In 1956, he had told Burma had a problem with China, and he advised Burmese Prime Minister, oh no, please go to Beijing, discuss by give and take settlement, but don't take rigid line. And if you take rigid line, that will not be solved. The fast forward 60 January 62. Only was
Network for the speed network
Nehru met him there.
network for our speed net.
Both
Speed
gave the same advice which had given him.
Mr. Swain, please mute. Swain, Mr. Swain. Okay, go ahead.
Unu was in Varanasi on the pilgrimage tour. That is January 62. Nehru met him there. Moreover, Unu turned to give Nehru the same advice which he had given him in 1950. Who advised Nehru to go to Beijing, solve the problem by give and take. Particularly since both dual life and foreign minister can be, but very anxious to resolve this. He also added that you have been to India already 3 times, and now you should go there. But Nehru ignored his advice. Even Khrushchev in 1959 had similarly advised and had said that a tranquil border was more important than a piece of territory. He gave the example of his own country and said that Iran had a claim on some Soviet territory. For the sake of tranquility, he conceded Iranian claim and returned the territory, and now they have a tranquil border. I think I'll stop.
Thank you. That's a heavily loaded with facts. Unfortunately, a lot of people had trouble hearing clearly. But anyway, unfortunately, but
The whole because I have to what you call contradict the line which we had been understanding all the
it
years.
is not
So I
being
had
clear.
to add-
Anyway, that's okay. So let me, kind of start off the discussion. I don't know, Charan, we have half an hour or what?
Actually, we had to close at 6:30 because people complain that we don't meet
Yeah.
our time. So let's have
Right.
another 15 minutes.
Yeah,
15, 20
because
minutes.
it's
I leave it to
into-
your judgment, but 15,
Okay.
20.
Okay, 15 minutes. So let me, I think the history is a very useful background, but let me start with the contemporary history, which I know very well and which, in a way, is a dividing line. After a series of measures in 2003 and so on, in 2005, a comprehensive boundary agreement was, which titled Principles for a Boundary Agreement was signed in 2005 by the governments of the People's Republic of China and the Republic of India. I would think in any normal situation, that should be the basis of what is valid going forward. No excuses, no colonialism, no other excuses, no what government, that government. Two sovereign independent governments have signed a particular agreement agreeing on the principles of a boundary agreement. Okay. Now, to my understanding, I'm not an expert on the boundary issue or on the agreements. There are basically two important principles in this agreement. One, which is particularly applicable to the Northeast, was the so-called Watershed Principle. In principle, the McMahon line, even though it was a big pen where there are several watersheds there, but the principle of watershed is something which is applicable probably to the whole central and the northeastern sector. And the second principle which was accepted was not moving or taking account of properly of settled population. The principle of settled population, for example, would apply to Tawang, where the population of Tawang is settled for centuries and considers itself part of India. So any agreement which did not include Tawang in India would involve people having to huge amount of refugees, people moving, giving up their housing, etc. So these were the two fundamental principles. Now the interesting thing is that immediately after this agreement was signed, in 2006, the People's Republic of China or the Communist Party of China had a change of heart and started becoming not just offensive but a few abusive. And I want very few people know this, and I still remember it personally from my personal memory. First, they announced that Arunachal Pradesh is South Tibet. Highly offensive move in 2006. Now, perhaps Mr. Bhasin can tell us if there's any historical antecedent to that, because it was a total shock to me. Where on earth has this come from? From the limited amount I know, how is suddenly the whole of Arunachal Pradesh South Tibet? I've never heard of this before, of any concept of that. There was a boundary problem, there was a McMahon line problem, there was a problem of the maps on which the so-called McMahon line was defined. But I'd never heard of this South China. And by the way, they didn't just change the name, they started abusing. I still remember the president or vice president, I don't remember exactly, visited Arunachal. And the representative of the People's Republic in India, either again, I don't know exactly, but either it was the head of the embassy, the ambassador, or his number two, abused the president of India in India. Okay, that was one. Then there was this whole issue of stapled visas. They stopped giving visas to IAS people kind of running a Ladakh, or the army chief, Northern Army commander, and a whole slew of these things. People may not know, I know from personal experience, they started raising objections in ADB, the Asian Development Bank. Then they took these objections to World Bank. Then they took it to IMF, everywhere. Okay, so they signed an agreement, and the next year they change it. Their word, their written word, their signature, what value does it have? It's from this episode that I remember, it has no value to them. So that is the nature of the regime. We must never forget this. Okay, this was a voluntary agreement. Nobody forced them. They signed it voluntarily in 2005. Nobody forced them. They cannot blame any other country in the world, any situation. So my first comment would be on that. If you have some background or comment on that, I would really welcome that. The second point, which I think there are a couple of, I don't know whether Tibetans or somebody maybe from Arunachal, I noticed, maybe they can comment on this, but I'll just lay it on the table. Tibet, even in the understanding between India and China, has been called the Tibet Autonomous Region. We never agreed to Tibet as an integral part of China, but as an autonomous region of China. Okay, one. Two, the Tibetan government in exile, or whatever you want to call it, says that we accept the boundary of more or less, maybe with minor adjustments, of what India claims to be its boundary. Obviously, it may not be 100%, but that's not the important. So this issue is slightly, and here I'm not that well informed. If you can say something on this whole concept of Tibet Autonomous Region, etc. I have these two questions. If you want to just say anything you want on it, and then we'll take a few other questions.
Sir, my simple observation is that first of all, my book until 1964, under Nehru. What happened is a history book, not a current book. That is one thing. Even if you take it further, that 2005, it was signed that populated area will not be disturbed. Supposing China agrees that Tawang or Nifa or the Arvind Pradesh can stay with India, or will prepare to write off a western sector where there is no population, where China had claimed China had occupied since 1950, and we had not even unfurled a flag there. I am going beyond my book, but since you raised this point, I am asking. Chinese did sign 2005 the principles, but they later on resigned from it. And my only submission is in this regard that my book is up to 1964. I have not gone any further. It's a history book. Secondly, since you have raised this question, this is my personal opinion. I'm not talking of any. I'm no longer a musician. That are we willing to write out that Ladakh area, Ladakh border and beyond Aksai chain? We still claim Ladakh as our Aksai chain as our territory. If there is no population there, settled is only Tuang or Nipa or the Untitled Pradesh. We are not prepared for that also. We are fighting for every inch of territory. And as regards your second point, I'm sorry, forgotten. If you kindly just give me a hint.
Tibet autonomous region.
Similar autonomous, yes. What is autonomy? Not this is the Chinese offered them autonomy in 1950 itself, but under their constitution, not as they enjoyed before 1950 under the Simla Convention or during the British regime. They are almost independent. But what Chinese autonomy is totally different. But the Tibet had enjoyed all these years. It's particularly important.
Yeah. Thank you. Charan Singh, Dr. Charan Singh, you have a question or a comments, or you want to read out a few, whatever?
Well, because of time, we'll just take the questions. There's a question by in the chat box. Why did, before India accepted Tibet as part of China before, why did, I'm not sure, but there's a question from Karma Topgate. Would you, if Karma Topgate is there, would you like to clarify what your question is?
Yeah, I had seen Karma also. I don't know where he is gone. Anyway, read it. Just read out the question. I don't know where he is.
Why did, before India accepted Tibet as part of China before, means I can't understand what the question is, but what I feel is that he
why did it accept? It is what he is asking.
Yeah.
India had no alternative but to accept, because if the Chinese said, you have no business in some internal matter, and we will occupy it, and they sent army. Did we have the army to face their army? No. India was not prepared to take up arms against China. Indian army was not even capable of it. They have just finished a war in Kashmir for over a year, and our resources were not there. The Tibetan Liberation Army, the Chinese Liberation Army, was a big force. They could meet even the Americans in Korea. And you think we would have taken up arms against the Chinese Liberation Army, People's Liberation Army? It was impossible. And we had no alternative. There was no space. We could not do anything. Even when we requested China to give them autonomy, they understood it. This is nothing to do business to talk about autonomy for Tibet. It is our business what we do with Tibet.
There's another question by the same participant asking, is there any possibility of free Tibet from China?
That was already decided in 1959. The whole world cannot get China Tibet independence of China unless the entire fabric of Chinese society gets destroyed. If there's a world war, China is defeated, then yes. But God knows. Then Nehru himself said that in 1959 in his press conference.
So, okay. So I think let me thank Mr. Bhasin for his talk. There was a lot of material there, but as I said, unfortunately, your voice was breaking, so some of us couldn't hear very clearly. I had that in chat, but yes, I think it was a very fact-filled talk. And thank you very much. With that, Charan, you want to make some concluding comments?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Bhasin, who agreed to come and speak to us on this, on the release of his book, which I think is a very, it's been a big, it's a big book. There's lots of serious research in it. Of course, I agree with you. The sound quality was not good, but one could easily make out what Mr. Bhasin is talking and the direction and the research that he's presenting to us. So I really thank Mr. Bhasin for that. The recording will be available tomorrow for people who would like to take the benefit of the recording. Most welcome. By noon, we'll be able to present it. There are two important events which are coming up in the next week. On July 16, next Friday, we have Professor Seema Batla, from JNU speaking to us about agriculture. I would invite all of you to come and please participate in that seminar too. On July 20th, we have from the World Bank, Dr. Ian Coast, presenting their flagship publication on the global economy. So we have two events coming up. One is July 16th, same time, and similarly July 20th, same time. One is coming from professor in JNU, and the other is from the World Bank from Washington, DC. I would urge you to please come and participate in those seminars. With this, I would like to once again thank our chairman for chairing the session today. I would like to thank Mr. Bhasin for presenting his book. It's a beautiful book. I'm glad. I think Mr. Bhasin was making a presentation from this very book, which was very, very interesting. And I want to thank all the participants for being with us on this Friday evening. Have a good weekend, and we all see you next Friday, same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank Mr. Vermani and the foundation for giving me this opportunity. Well, if the voice was breaking, I don't know if it's my fault or the technical fault. But
I think it's a technical issue.
I had given.
So I think it was a technical issue.
It was technical problem, sir. Technical problem.
Then I have
Yeah.
I have given a copy of this presentation to the foundation, and they can probably circulate it if you think it is necessary, and then they will get a clear picture. And once again, thank you very much, all of you who have participated, and to Mr. Vermani and Chair.
Sir, this book is
We
available.
shall do
also?
that with the yes, the book is available, and the presentation which Mr. Bhasin has made, we will put along with his recording. We will put it for the participants to benefit from.
Thank you very much.
So
Sir. Thank
that
you.
The book is available. The book is available.